Thank you, and welcome everybody. Welcome to my studio. In case you have not met me before, my job is to make the guests that you bring look good on camera. Content marketing can't work without having good talent to be on camera. Goes without saying, and yet how many times do we see world-beating talent on stage? Half the time, what do we see when it comes to content marketing programs that we see online? Do we see engaging and effusive speakers? No, sometimes, halfway. Would we agree that perhaps we have some way to go to bring those sort of effusive speakers to us and our Asian audiences? And yet, as we've discovered, there are lots of hurdles to get to that. Now, my personal view is that we all must become better presenters, because not only do our companies depend on it, not only do our marketing campaigns depend on it, but in a sense, we depend on it as countries. I don't need to tell you that Singapore is very resource poor. The only resource we really have is people. And so clearly, we need to be better at selling our story. We need to be able to match it with people in other parts of the world who are very good in telling their stories. So what's getting in the way? Often people say that people in Asia just aren't good presenters like they are in other parts of the world. I would like to say that that's not true. And not for being kind, but because of the work that we've done over the last couple of years, 5 years to be precise, on using personality tests together with presentation skills. Now, this is possibly something entirely new to you, but let's take a step back and see what usually happens when marketers get spokespeople to appear on camera. What's usually the first thing that the designated spokesperson will then say to you? What's the first thing the designated spokesperson says when you say, "Hey boss, we're doing a content marketing program. We need a domain expert to be on camera and we've picked you"? And they respond, yes, thank you. Most likely, no thank you. Right? And what sort of reasons do they give? Not comfortable.
What do you want me to say?
Yeah. Have you got a script for me, perhaps? Right?
How I feel the time.
Yes. And gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm super busy. What else?
What shouldn't I say?
Yes, I'm really nervous about saying the wrong thing here. I'm a backroom sort of person. I'm not the one to hog the limelight. And then they'll make some sort of excuse about how, we Asians are far more demure and modest. And, we're not like those pesky Brits who, forever seem to be hogging the stage. And yet what we have found through Clifton Strengths personality testing is that is patently false. We found over the last 5 years and 3,000 guests, 3,000 presentation skills and media training guests, that from a personality perspective, there is no reason why we can't have just as many Asian presenters, why we can't have just as many effusive, engaging, interesting, dynamic Asian presenters. So how do we get there? And so what you might find surprising is that the single biggest factor standing in the way of presenters wanting to be on stage is not at all connected to their Asian heritage or their ethnic background. It is entirely personality driven. Let's look at some of the most common sources of stage fright to illustrate the point. How many of you here actually would admit to, also making that excuse, I'm more of a backroom person, I don't like to be on stage? Anybody here? Yes. Quite a number, right? And that's very common. Not everybody loves to bounce on stage like Andy Edmonds. So why not? So the first thing that you need to recognize is that actually everybody has a slightly different form of stage fright. What we've discovered is that there are 12 different forms of stage fright, all linked to personality. Let me try on some of these and see whether this resonates with you. Some people suffer stage fright because they never seem to be fully prepared. Their nervousness doesn't come from people looking at them. It comes from the thought that I didn't do my homework well enough. Does that resonate with you? Yes? The fact is, though, that if you have this particular mindset, which in personality parlance, Clifton Strengths calls this responsibility. People with responsibility are those souls who you recognize. They're the ones who go to the ends of the earth to keep a promise. Maybe you're one of them, where you make a promise and for whatever reason, it doesn't work out, you're not able to keep the promise. 20 years later, you'll still have a guilty conscience about it. People who have this responsibility mindset then bring that level of commitment and ownership to presentations, and they beat themselves up endlessly with a guilty conscience for not having done their homework. But that's very different from some of the other types of stage fright. For example, are any among you here people watchers? You enjoy watching people. Yes? Right? If you're a people watcher, that means that you're likely to have what's called an individualization mindset. Now, we can all watch people just like we can all be responsible. But people with individualization can't help themselves but to sit, let's say, in a transit lounge, and before their plane boarding call comes up, they will have assessed all their fellow passengers and made silent little judgments about everybody. This individualization mindset is not a choice. This is how people are wired. And the way that it translates into stage fright is a great fear of looking into a camera and talking to it. If you are wired to read people, then that doesn't just mean that you're good at it. It means that you need to read people. And looking into a camera, there's no one to read. Can you see how different that is from the first form of stage fright of responsibility? Two more. One of them is called restorative. People who have a restorative mindset aren't just good at restoring things. Remember, these are mindsets, personality traits. People with restorative love solving problems. People with restorative are the sort who see a problem in everything. If you have this form of mindset, let me ask you, how many of you agonized after getting results from an exam over the points you didn't get rather than celebrating the points that you did? Does that sound like you? Cool, right? Even though you got 95%, your friends are out partying. Meantime, you're back in your student dorm, cracking your skull thinking, how in the world did I miss these 5 points? What did I miss out on? Once again, this is not just something people do. This is a personality trait. And the way this then translates to the stage is that they always feel short of the 100%. They then have a self-critical voice ringing in their ears, telling them at every turn how bad they were in their presentation. Even while they're still in the presentation, they're self-critiquing. They have a little devil on the shoulder who keeps whispering in their ear, you mispronounced this. My video didn't fire. I hope I don't jinx your presentation. Goodness, why did I mispronounce that word? I need to start the sentence again. So there are just 3 examples. There are 12 different forms of stage fright. Now, as we look to become better presenters and how we help the people who we want to put on camera as part of our content marketing efforts, we must start with solving the stage fright. It's not about technique. Yes, clearly there are some presentation techniques. But first and foremost, we have to put people into their comfort zones. I recognize that this is possibly a little bit unusual because most of the time what you read, the famous internet advice is, you've got to step out of your comfort zone. Yeah, clearly we want to grow, push ourselves, push our boundaries. No arguments. But to now get into a humiliating position on camera is highly unlikely going to result in a great content marketing campaign. Instead, we need to make sure that that is you, firstly understand what your comfort zones actually are. That's where the personality assessment is so important. And Clifton Strengths breaks your personality down into 34 different personality traits. Once you know what your comfort zones are, we don't want you to take you out of it. We want you to stay in it so that you can build on your personality. Don't pretend to be somebody else. Build on who you already are. Build that out with skills and knowledge and techniques. And that's how you can build yourself up. And ultimately, if we solve that problem, then we'd have a lot of more people who would be not only receptive to learning the tips and tricks and the techniques and the skills, but also you as content marketers will have a much easier time getting your spokesperson to actually front the camera. Now you approach them and say, hey, we've got this content marketing campaign going. We're producing a podcast. We're looking at producing some TikTok videos, YouTube Shorts videos, whatever form your campaign takes. And now, instead of saying, I'm too busy, no, I'm a backroom sort of person, I don't like the limelight. Now they'll say, yeah, actually, I can do this. Where do we start? All of these learnings are captured in the book that we are here to officially launch tonight. And it's all about a choose-your-own-adventure journey, venturing into your personality to not only share key tips and tricks, but also to turn those learnings, to apply those techniques, given the different personality types that there are out there. This is not a book that you would read cover to cover. It is a book that you would read in accompaniment to your Clifton Strengths assessment so that you can say, okay, this is the personality that I am. Now let's see how I can apply even those techniques which don't naturally appeal to me and still get comfortable in them. Since we soft launched this book with our clients, we've sold several hundred copies, which, given the fact that most of our training workshops are in small groups of 2, 3, or 4, should indicate the level of interest that we've had. Please join us on this quest. It isn't really just about the book, although, of course, I hope you buy a copy tonight. It is about the quest to meet not only our corporate needs, to be out there, putting our message out with our subject matter experts, our nominated spokespeople. It's also not only a quest for the industry that you come from. This is a national quest for us in Asia and Singapore and Malaysia in particular, to be able to tell our story on a global stage, to be taking part in pitch briefings, pitch meetings in Silicon Valley, and have people say, those Singaporeans are just as good as the Americans. To be traveling to banking events in Hong Kong or London and have people say, wow, those Singaporeans really sell their message well. That's the quest that I need you all to be on tonight. And it starts with the resource you already have, your own personality. So thank you for your time and attention today. Thank you for coming to our studio, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Mark, thank you so much. I am definitely a behind the camera kind of guy. I hate this.
Just wait till we are done with you, Andy.
Yeah. I can't wait. Well, firstly, thank you so much, you three, for taking your time to firstly build a presentation and write a book. That takes a bit of time. And for taking the time out of your evening. I genuinely appreciate that. So let me open up to the floor. Yes.
Yeah, got a question for Mark.
We have a mic.
Oh, wow. Thanks, Dutch.
Thank you. You talked about stage fright and presenting specifically to camera. Just curious how it's different to be on stage without camera versus camera. Just really the commonalities and the differences.
Yes. Well, there are, as I mentioned, 12 different forms of stage fright. People who do not do so well on camera because of that talent that I mentioned earlier, individualization, actually do surprisingly well on stage. Because as they look across the 300 members of their audience, there's lots of faces for them to read. What an irony. Not good on camera, great on stage. Then there are those who actually much prefer the camera. They have what's called an empathy mindset. People with empathy aren't just empathetic. They have a mindset that's emotionally wired. They're the sort of people who cry even in happy movies, very emotionally attuned. When they stand on stage, those 300 faces looking at them feel like a wash of emotion coming their way. They're so emotionally in tune, they can feel all 300 people, and that's actually quite nerve-wracking. They much prefer the camera because there's no emotion coming the other way. So those are just two mindsets. There are many others. People with an arranger mindset are those who organize their wardrobe by color. Anybody here?
Sure.
Those? Yes? Are you a multitasker as well? A delegator?
I can.
Absolutely not a multitasker, let me tell you.
Thank you very much.
People with an arranger mindset aren't just very good at organizing their wardrobe or delegating or multitasking. They have a need to move across the stage. They can't stand still behind the rostrum. I could go on, right? Then there are people with a woo mindset. You recognize these because they're the ones who chat you up in elevators. They're the passenger who sits down in the seat next to you and starts sharing their life story. By the time you land, they will have shared their email address, phone numbers, and family photographs. People who have that mindset can't wait to be on stage. So the bottom line is different personalities play out in very different ways on stage. What matters is that you understand what your personality is. Self-awareness, self-acceptance, and then self-regulation. Getting the best out of your own personality.
Yeah. Well, let's give you the mic just in case.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. The personal takeaways for me is that there must be a good balance between the individual style that you find, knowing yourself and your strength, but also what is the recipe and the best practice determined by the media, right, the digital. So my question is about, I know that the focus now is on speeches on camera, but to quote FK, I would like to think of what is one of the most common stage here, the business pitch or the elevator speech in Asia, right? It's a kind of stage as well. I was wondering if you have a chance to give some advice on what will be the story arc for the perfect, very short business pitch.
I could add something too from a business pitch and how it's driven by personality. So what is a pitch? It's a short statement, punchy, impactful, gets to the point. How long is a pitch usually in a business or an investment context?
50 seconds.
Yeah, yeah. In a roadshow, Richard, how long would it be? Yeah, 10, 15 minutes. So there are some people who will then say 3,000 words in those 15 minutes. They usually have what's called a communication mindset. It's not an ability, it's a personality trait. You recognize these people because they're complete chatterboxes. Can't shut them up. Then there are others who will ideate their entire way through the pitch. Forget about sticking to a clearly defined problem statement and how our startup now solves that problem with our product or service. They are tangential in their thoughts. They're the ones who post on LinkedIn that you should always think out of the box. Why? Because they do. Without even trying, they come up with 20 ideas. You know if you have an ideation mindset because by now, an hour and a half into our event, you would have already had 10 ideas. So there are 2 out of, again, 34 different mindsets that play out very differently in pitches. From a coaching perspective, the issue isn't so much in teaching people how do you pitch, but how do you counterweight some of those mindsets that work against you? If you're always thinking out of the box or using 3,000 words when 30 would have been sufficient, how do you put those genies back in the bottle? And so, again, it starts with the same process. Self-awareness. I recognize I have an ideation mindset. And frankly, I love the fact that I'm a walking brainstorm. But self-regulation. The pitch isn't the time to be brainstorming. We should be doing the brainstorming beforehand. So it's about regulating, self-regulating your own mindsets.
Great. I feel seen.
Yeah. I feel confused. I'm at least 6 mindsets at the moment.
We're all at
You
least
all
10 mindsets. We all have at least 10 mindsets. And sometimes they're actually in conflict. There are some people, for example, who are very much driven by emotion, empathy, as I mentioned earlier. But they also happen to have an analytical mindset. They're torn between, do I now just stick to the logical flow? To hell with how anybody feels about it. But I could also see the other side, which is to take a very emotional approach. You have contrasts between 2 other talent themes called context and futuristic. Some people are very much orientated towards the future. They don't really care about the past. They're only thinking about where will I be in 5 years, 10 years? Where will I retire? They are the ones who think about where their kids go to school before they're even married. And then there is the context folks who love to spend their time in museums, always thinking of how do they do things in the past? What lessons could I learn so that I don't make mistakes of the past? Two completely different mindsets. And yet, sometimes they live in the same head. They then come for coaching and say, on the one hand, I'm really future-oriented, but I also really want to know about the past. I'm confused. Which one should I be? The answer is self-awareness, self-acceptance, self-regulation. You decide which mindset to be in. It's no longer a struggle. You're in control. That's a great place to be.
I've got a question for you, Mark. Is that
Sure.
okay if I, yeah? So you talk a lot about, and I'd be really interested in the book, but you talk a lot about how you can identify your own communication styles or your own fears. Is it possible, like in a client situation, to be able to identify the person you're talking to and then understand what would be the things that motivate them? So if you could say, oh, well, this person only wants to talk about potential and future, then I can adjust my language to them. Because if I start talking about stuff I've done, they're probably not going to be as impressed as we're talking. Is there any ways that...
It's a very astute question. And the answer is a qualified yes. Clearly, there are some signs that people give where you can recognize what sort of mindset they are. For example, people who arrive late to a meeting, but message ahead, and then arrive apologizing profusely before blaming the grab driver for dropping them off at the wrong point, usually have a responsibility mindset. Knowing that they have responsibility, you can always count on them to give an honest opinion on most things. Very substance-driven, and they like to hold themselves and others to account. Right? So now it's up to you to decide, how do I deal with somebody who treasures that accountability, that loyalty, and the focus on detail? Let me give you another example. A client who constantly cuts you off. You're just launching into the pitch and you're not even able to finish your sentence. And there they go again, interrupting you and possibly looking terribly impatient and saying, okay, you've already had 3 minutes of my time. Why don't you cut to the chase? People who do that often don't do that because they're rude. It's because they have an activator mindset. Before the end of the night, I would have talked to you about all 34, right? People with activator don't just activate, right? Because we can all get started, just like we can all communicate and we can all be responsible. They have an internal drive that says, why have we not done this yet? Let's go. Let's do this. What you'll often find about them is that they are quite impulsive and impatient about most things. They want to cut to the chase. What does that tell you when you're pitching? You might just say, okay, boss, let's cut to the chase. Here's my last slide.
Right.
They'll probably quite like that.
Great.
The only reason why I say a qualified yes is because this is an imperfect art. It's much easier to see what is the talent theme and now what behaviors and words am I likely to hear from that person, rather than looking at the words and behaviors and extrapolating from that what their talents are. It's risky. It's easy to get that wrong. There are different mindsets that lead to the same behaviors. So it's open to misinterpretation, right? But in general, you can kind of get a hint that when somebody constantly cuts you off, okay, activate a mindset. Okay, boss, what do you need? Let's cut to the chase. They'll probably really appreciate it.
Interesting. It's like a Jedi mind trick.
Yes, these aren't the ads you're looking for.
Look, guys, with that, I'll say thank you very much. I want to thank you all for spending your evening with us. I appreciate there is a million and one things to do in Singapore. But thank you for spending it with us. We genuinely appreciate your time. Devki, Jason, Mark, thank you so much for your time as well and this amazing studio to host us in. Genuinely appreciate that.